Margaret Chen was supposed to be impossible to lose. The 82-year-old Alzheimer's patient couldn't remember her own name, couldn't tie her shoes, and needed help using the bathroom. She was confined to the secure dementia ward at Providence General Hospital in Portland, Oregon, where doors required keycards and patients wore monitoring bracelets that triggered alarms if they wandered too far. Yet on October 15, 2019, Margaret simply vanished from her hospital bed, and where they found her 3 days later would make medical professionals question everything they thought they knew about the human mind. But here's what makes this case truly impossible to explain. The security footage shows Margaret never left her room. The monitoring bracelet never triggered an alarm. The locked ward doors never opened without authorized keycard access. So how did an 82-year-old woman with severe dementia, who couldn't remember her daughter's face or find her way to the bathroom, manage to disappear from one of the most secure medical facilities on the West Coast? If you think you know how this story ends, trust me, you don't. Because what happened to Margaret Chen over those 3 missing days challenges everything we understand about memory, consciousness, and the mysterious workings of the human brain. Subscribe now, because the truth behind Margaret's disappearance is more incredible than any medical textbook has ever documented. Sarah Martinez had been working the night shift in Providence General's memory care unit for 8 years, and she thought she'd seen everything that Alzheimer's disease could throw at her. Patients who forgot they were married for 50 years, others who reverted to speaking only their childhood language, and some who became convinced that long-dead relatives were waiting for them in the hospital cafeteria. But Margaret Chen was different. She was what medical professionals called a ghost patient, so advanced in her cognitive decline that she existed in a perpetual state of confusion, unable to form new memories or access most of her old ones. Margaret had been admitted to Providence General 3 weeks earlier, after wandering away from her daughter Lisa's home in the middle of the night, barefoot and wearing only a nightgown, in 40-degree October weather. Lisa Chen, a software engineer who worked for Intel, had been caring for her mother at home for 2 years. But Margaret's condition had deteriorated to the point where professional care was no longer optional but essential for her safety. The secure memory care unit on the 4th floor of Providence General was designed specifically for patients like Margaret. The ward featured motion sensors in every room, pressure-sensitive floor mats that detected when patients got out of bed, and doors that could only be opened with authorized keycard. Each patient wore a monitoring bracelet that tracked their location within the facility and triggered immediate alerts if they moved beyond designated safe zones. The nursing station maintained 24-hour visual contact with the main corridor, and security cameras recorded every area of the ward except the bathrooms and patient rooms, which were considered private spaces under HIPAA regulation. Margaret's daily routine had become as predictable as clockwork during her 3 weeks at Providence General. She woke each morning at 6:15 a.m., confused and frightened, calling for her mother who had died 30 years earlier. The nursing staff would gently redirect her attention to breakfast, which she ate mechanically, often forgetting she was eating between bites. She spent her days sitting in the common area, staring at a television that might as well have been showing static for all the comprehension she displayed. By 7 p.m. exhaustion would overwhelm her confusion, and she would sleep deeply until morning, her breathing monitored by sensors that ensured she remained safe throughout the night. James Wilson, the neurologist overseeing Margaret's care, had explained to Lisa that her mother existed in what he termed the long twilight, conscious but not truly aware, alive but not really living in any meaningful sense that most people would recognize. Margaret's brain scans showed extensive damage to the hippocampus and frontal cortex, regions responsible for memory formation and executive function. The woman who had once been a mathematics professor at Portland State University, who had published research papers on statistical analysis and raised 2 successful children as a single mother after her husband's death, now struggled to recognize her own reflection in a mirror. On the night of October 15th, everything about Margaret's routine proceeded exactly as it had for the previous 3 weeks. Nurse Martinez checked on her at 11 p.m. during routine rounds, finding Margaret sleeping peacefully in bed, her monitoring bracelet blinking its steady green light that indicated normal vital signs and proper positioning within the secure zone. The pressure-sensitive floor mat beside her bed showed no activity, and the motion sensors in her room detected only the gentle rise and fall of her breathing under the hospital blanket. At 11:45 p.m. Martinez completed her documentation for the evening shift and prepared to hand over care to the night nurse, Robert Kim, who had been working memory care for 12 years and knew every patient in the ward by name and medical history. Kim's first round at midnight confirmed that all 18 patients in the unit were accounted for and resting comfortably. Margaret's room, number 47, showed no unusual activity on any of the monitoring systems. The discovery that Margaret was missing didn't come until 6:30 a.m., when the day shift nurse, Patricia Gonzalez, entered room 407 to begin morning medication rounds. The bed was empty, the blankets pulled back neatly, as if Margaret had simply gotten up to use the bathroom. But the bathroom was empty, and Margaret was nowhere to be found in the room. Most bizarrely, her monitoring bracelet lay on the nightstand beside her bed, still blinking its green light, still registering normal vital signs as if it were attached to her wrist. The initial response followed standard missing patient protocols. The ward was immediately locked down, preventing anyone from entering or leaving the fourth floor. Hospital security began a systematic search of the building, checking every room, closet and storage area that Margaret could conceivably have accessed. The Portland police were notified, and within an hour, officers were reviewing security footage and interviewing staff members who had been on duty during the night shift. But the security footage told an impossible story. The cameras in the main corridor showed no activity between midnight and 6 a.m., except for Nurse Kim making his scheduled rounds at 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. The stairwell cameras showed no unauthorized access. The elevator cameras revealed only hospital staff moving between floors on legitimate business. Most importantly, the keycard access logs showed no record of Margaret's bracelet or any other credentials being used to open the doors leading out of the memory care unit. Martinez, the attending physician who had been caring for Margaret, arrived at the hospital at 7 a.m. to find her patient missing, and a full-scale investigation underway. As she reviewed Margaret's medical records and the timeline of events, Martinez faced a medical mystery that challenged everything she understood about Alzheimer's disease and patient behavior. How could a woman who couldn't remember her own daughter's name, who became confused trying to find the bathroom in a room she'd occupied for 3 weeks, somehow figure out how to remove a monitoring device, leave her room undetected, and exit a secure medical facility without triggering a single alarm? The search for Margaret Chen expanded beyond Providence General Hospital within hours of her disappearance being discovered. Portland Police Detective Lisa Rodriguez, who had handled missing person cases for 15 years, arrived at the hospital at 8 a.m. to coordinate with hospital security and interview staff members. Detective Rodriguez had worked cases involving dementia patients before, and she knew that time was critical. Elderly individuals with cognitive impairment, who wandered away from care facilities, faced significant risks from exposure, dehydration and disorientation, especially with nighttime temperatures dropping into the mid. The initial search focused on the immediate area surrounding Providence General, with the assumption that Margaret couldn't have traveled far on foot, especially given her frail physical condition and severe cognitive impairment. Hospital records indicated that Margaret weighed only 98 pounds and had been using a walker to move around the facility. Her medications included sedatives that would have made her drowsy and potentially unsteady on her feet. The logical conclusion was that she had somehow gotten confused and was hiding somewhere within the hospital complex, perhaps frightened and unable to communicate her location to searchers. Portland police deployed search teams with specialized training in locating missing elderly individuals. The teams included officers with experience in dementia-related disappearances, search and rescue volunteers, and even specially trained dogs capable of tracking scent trails from clothing items. Margaret's daughter Lisa provided a pillowcase from her mother's room to help the dogs establish a scent trail. Though she struggled to explain to officers what her mother might have been thinking or where she might have wanted to go, given that Margaret rarely expressed coherent thoughts about her desires or intentions. The hospital's security director, Marcus Thompson, reviewed every piece of surveillance footage from the previous 48 hours, looking for any anomaly that might explain how Margaret had left the facility. The memory care unit's cameras showed the usual routine: patients moving slowly through common areas, staff members conducting their duties, family members visiting during approved hours. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary until Thompson noticed something peculiar in footage from the evening before Margaret's disappearance. At 7:23 p.m. on October 14th, approximately 18 hours before Margaret was discovered missing, the security cameras captured her standing in the corridor outside her room, something that was unusual but not unprecedented for dementia patients who sometimes experienced confusion about their surroundings. What was strange was Margaret's behavior. She appeared to be studying the keycard access panel beside the stairwell door, touching it repeatedly and examining the small LED lights that indicated the door's locked status. For a woman who typically showed no interest in her environment and rarely initiated purposeful activity, this behavior was remarkably focused and deliberate. More disturbing was what happened next in the footage. Margaret walked slowly but deliberately to the nursing station, where she stood for several minutes observing the night staff as they completed their documentation. Her posture and attention appeared more alert than anyone had seen her in weeks. as if some spark of awareness had temporarily returned to her damaged mind. After watching the staff for approximately 10 minutes, Margaret returned to her room, and the cameras showed no further unusual activity until her disappearance was discovered the following morning. Wilson, Margaret's neurologist, found the security footage deeply troubling when Detective Rodriguez showed it to him during their interview. The behavior captured on camera was completely inconsistent with Margaret's documented cognitive state and the severe brain damage revealed by her recent MRI scan. Patients with Margaret's level of dementia simply didn't engage in complex observational behavior or show sudden improvements in awareness and purposeful movement. The footage suggested either a significant error in Margaret's diagnosis or a temporary neurological event that had no precedent in medical literature. As the first day of searching concluded without finding any trace of Margaret, Detective Rodriguez expanded the investigation to include interviews with Margaret's family members, hoping to gain insight into places that might have held special significance for her before her illness progressed. Lisa Chen, devastated by her mother's disappearance, provided a detailed history of Margaret's life in Portland, including the house where she had raised her children, the university where she had taught mathematics, and the community center where she had volunteered as a literacy tutor for immigrant families. Margaret's younger son, David Chen, flew in from Seattle to assist with the search efforts. David, who worked as a physician at Swedish Medical Center, had maintained a more distant relationship with his mother as her illness progressed, finding it emotionally difficult to witness her cognitive decline. During his interview with Detective Rodriguez, David mentioned that Margaret had occasionally displayed what he called islands of clarity during the early stages of her illness, brief moments when her confusion would lift, and she would seem almost like her old self, discussing complex mathematical concepts or asking detailed questions about his medical practice. These islands of clarity had become increasingly rare as Margaret's condition worsened, and David hadn't observed any such episodes during his visits over the past 6 months. However, he wondered if some form of neurological event might have temporarily restored enough cognitive function for Margaret to plan and execute an escape from the hospital, though he acknowledged that such a recovery would be unprecedented in medical literature, and probably impossible given the extent of brain damage documented in her recent scan. The search entered its second day, with no leads and no credible sightings of Margaret, despite widespread media coverage and public appeals for information. Detective Rodriguez coordinated with neighboring police departments, homeless outreach workers, and transit authorities to expand the search beyond Portland's immediate area. The prevailing theory among investigators was that Margaret had somehow left the hospital and become lost, possibly falling victim to exposure or injury in an area that hadn't yet been thoroughly searched. But the security footage continued to haunt Dr. Martinez as she reviewed Margaret's medical records and consulted with colleagues about possible explanations for her patient's disappearance. The woman captured on camera studying the door access panel and observing nursing procedures bore no resemblance to the confused, disoriented patient who had been under her care for 3 weeks. The focused attention and purposeful movement suggested cognitive abilities that Margaret's brain scans indicated should have been impossible. Dr. Martinez reached out to Dr. Rebecca Foster, a colleague at Oregon Health and Science University, who specialized in unusual neurological presentations and had published research on rare cases of cognitive improvement in dementia patients. Foster had documented fewer than a dozen cases worldwide where patients with severe Alzheimer's disease had experienced temporary periods of dramatic cognitive improvement, though these episodes typically lasted only hours and were often followed by accelerated decline. The phenomenon, sometimes called terminal lucidity, was poorly understood and rarely documented in medical literature. Foster explained that some researchers theorized that certain neurological events, possibly small strokes or changes in brain chemistry, might temporarily bypass damaged neural pathways and restore limited cognitive function. She had never encountered a case where such an episode lasted long enough for a patient to plan and execute complex behavior like escaping from a secure facility. As the second day of searching concluded, the investigation took an unexpected turn when Detective Rodriguez received a call from the manager of a Greyhound bus station in downtown Portland. The manager reported that surveillance footage from October 15th showed an elderly Asian woman boarding a bus bound for San Francisco at 3:47 a.m., approximately 5 hours before Margaret's disappearance was discovered. The woman appeared to be traveling alone and had paid for her ticket in cash, providing no identification. The bus station footage was grainy and poorly lit, making positive identification difficult, but the woman's general appearance and clothing were consistent with what Margaret might have been wearing when she left the hospital. More importantly, the timestamp indicated that if this was indeed Margaret, she had somehow left Providence General, traveled approximately 3 miles to downtown Portland, and purchased a bus ticket during the early morning hours when her monitoring systems showed no unusual activity. Detective Rodriguez immediately contacted San Francisco Police and the California Highway Patrol to alert them about a possible missing person traveling by bus toward their jurisdiction. The Greyhound bus in question was scheduled to arrive in San Francisco at 2:15 p.m. on October 16, assuming it maintained its regular schedule and made all planned stops along the route. Rodriguez also dispatched officers to interview the bus driver and any passengers who might have interacted with the elderly woman during the journey. Meanwhile, Martinez struggled to reconcile the possibility that Margaret had successfully navigated the complex process of leaving the hospital, traveling across the city, and purchasing transportation to another state. Such behavior required not only cognitive abilities that Margaret's brain damage should have made impossible, but also access to money and decision-making skills that she hadn't demonstrated in months. The medical implications of such a dramatic but temporary cognitive recovery were staggering and would require complete re-evaluation of current understanding about Alzheimer's disease progression. The confirmation came at 4:30 p.m. on October 16, when San Francisco police located Margaret Chen at the Greyhound terminal, sitting quietly on a bench in the waiting area, looking confused and frightened. She was wearing the same hospital gown and slippers she had been sleeping in when she disappeared from Providence General, with a hospital blanket wrapped around her shoulders for warmth. In her hand she clutched a piece of paper with an address written in what appeared to be her own handwriting, though the handwriting was far more legible and controlled than anything she had produced during her hospitalization. Officer Maria Santos, who responded to the call at the bus terminal, found Margaret in a state of severe disorientation that was consistent with advanced dementia. Margaret couldn't explain how she had arrived at the terminal, couldn't remember purchasing a bus ticket, and repeatedly asked for her mother in Mandarin, despite having spoken only English during her recent hospitalization. She showed no recognition of her surroundings and appeared frightened by the unfamiliar environment and the presence of police officers. The address on the paper Margaret was holding corresponded to a location in San Francisco's Chinatown district, a small apartment building on Grant Avenue that had no obvious connection to Margaret's known history or family relationship. Detective Rodriguez, who flew to San Francisco to escort Margaret back to Portland, accompanied Officer Santos to investigate the address and determine why Margaret might have traveled 63.5 miles to reach this specific location. The apartment building at the address was an aging structure typical of Chinatown's dense residential architecture, housing primarily elderly Chinese immigrants and their family. The building manager, an elderly man named Chen Wei, who spoke limited English, initially denied knowing anything about Margaret or why she might have come to his building. However, when Detective Rodriguez showed him a photograph of Margaret and explained the circumstances of her disappearance, Chen Wei's demeanor changed dramatically. Speaking through a translator, Chen Wei revealed that Margaret had arrived at his building at approximately 6 a.m. on October 16th, just hours after her bus would have arrived in San Francisco. She had knocked on his door and asked for someone named Lin Ming, in fluent Mandarin, displaying no signs of the confusion and disorientation that characterized her usual behavior. Chen Wei had been surprised by the elderly woman's unexpected visit, but had invited her inside when she began speaking about old times and shared memory. What Chen Wei told Detective Rodriguez through the translator challenged everything that Margaret's medical records and family history had established about her background and identity. According to Chen Wei, Margaret had spoken at length about her childhood in China, describing specific details about a village outside Shanghai where she claimed to have lived until she was 12 years old. She had asked about neighbors and family members by name, demonstrating detailed knowledge of people and places that Chen Wei recognized from his own childhood in the same region. Most remarkably, Margaret had conversed entirely in Mandarin during her visit with Chen Wei, displaying fluency and cultural knowledge that seemed impossible given her documented background as someone who had been born and raised in the United States. Margaret's daughter Lisa had always understood that her mother was second-generation American, born in Portland to Chinese immigrant parents who had died when Margaret was young. There had never been any indication that Margaret spoke Mandarin fluently or had detailed knowledge of life in rural China. Chen Wei explained that he had known someone named Lin Ming many years ago, a young woman who had lived in his village in China and had emigrated to America in the 1960s, around the same time that he had left China himself. Lin Ming had been known for her exceptional intelligence and had planned to pursue education in mathematics, though Chen Wei had lost contact with her after they both arrived in America and settled in different cities. The possibility that Margaret Chen had been living under a different identity, or that her documented personal history was somehow incomplete or inaccurate, opened up entirely new dimensions to the mystery of her disappearance and temporary cognitive recovery. Detective Rodriguez realized that understanding Margaret's true background might be essential to explaining how she had managed to overcome her severe dementia long enough to plan and execute a journey to San Francisco, to search for someone from what appeared to be her distant past. Martinez, who consulted with Detective Rodriguez by phone from Portland, found the developments in San Francisco both medically fascinating and deeply troubling. The idea that Margaret had experienced such a dramatic restoration of cognitive function that she could speak fluently in a language she supposedly didn't know, travel independently across 3 states, and recall detailed memories from decades earlier challenged everything the medical community understood about Alzheimer's disease and brain damage. The phenomenon of patients accessing forgotten languages during medical events had been documented in rare cases, usually involving individuals who had suffered strokes or traumatic brain injuries. However, Margaret's case was unique because her cognitive improvement appeared to have been temporary and specific. She had regained just enough mental clarity to pursue a specific goal, then returned to her baseline state of severe confusion once that goal was achieved. When Margaret was returned to Portland and readmitted to Providence General Hospital, she showed no memory of her journey to San Francisco and no ability to speak Mandarin when tested by a translator. Her cognitive state appeared to have returned to the same severe level of impairment that had characterized her condition before the disappearance, as if the 3 days of unusual behavior had been a brief window of clarity that had closed as mysteriously as it had opened. Martinez ordered comprehensive neurological testing to determine if Margaret had experienced a stroke, seizure, or other medical event that might explain her temporary cognitive improvement. Brain scans showed the same pattern of damage that had been documented before her disappearance, with no evidence of new injury or changes in brain structure that might account for her brief period of enhanced mental function. The medical mystery deepened when Martinez reviewed the timeline of Margaret's disappearance and recovery. Hospital security footage confirmed that Margaret had somehow left her room and the secure ward without triggering any alarms or being detected by surveillance camera. The keycard access logs showed no record of the doors being opened during the critical time period, yet Margaret had clearly found a way to exit the building and travel to downtown Portland in time to catch an early morning bus to San Francisco. The investigation into Margaret's true identity and background became a collaborative effort between Detective Rodriguez, hospital social workers, and genealogy researchers, who specialized in tracing Chinese-American family history. Margaret's daughter Lisa provided birth certificates, immigration documents, and family photographs, but the researchers quickly discovered inconsistencies that suggested Margaret's documented background might not tell the complete story of her life. Birth records for Margaret Chen indicated that she had been born in Portland in 1937 to Chinese immigrant parents named Chen Dao and Lin Ming. However, immigration records for her supposed parents contained discrepancies in dates and places that suggested the documents might have been altered or forged at some point. More intriguingly, there was no record of Margaret attending Portland schools during her childhood, despite family stories that she had been an exceptional student who had received scholarships for her mathematical ability. The genealogy research revealed that Chinese immigrants during the 1930s and 1940s sometimes assumed false identities or altered their personal histories to overcome discriminatory immigration laws and social prejudice. It was possible that Margaret had indeed been born in China and had emigrated to the United States under circumstances that required her to adopt a new identity, including false information about her birthplace and family history. This possibility gained credibility when researchers discovered immigration records for a young woman named Lin Ming, who had arrived in San Francisco in 1949 on a student visa to study mathematics at the University of California. The woman's age and physical description were consistent with Margaret, and her academic background matched the mathematical expertise that Margaret had demonstrated throughout her documented career as a professor at Portland State University. If Margaret Chen and Lin Ming were indeed the same person, it would explain her fluent Mandarin, her detailed knowledge of rural Chinese village life, and her instinctive journey to San Francisco's Chinatown, when her dementia temporarily lifted enough to access long-suppressed memories. It would also suggest that Margaret had lived with a false identity for more than 70 years, successfully concealing her true background from her children and maintaining a completely fabricated personal history until her illness stripped away the psychological barriers that had kept those memories hidden. Martinez consulted with colleagues at major medical centers across the country to find similar cases where Alzheimer's patients had experienced such dramatic temporary improvements in cognitive function. The few documented cases in medical literature involved patients who had briefly regained the ability to recognize family members or perform simple tasks, but none approached the complexity of Margaret's experience, which had involved advanced planning, navigation, communication skills that should have been impossible given her documented brain damage. The case attracted attention from neurologists and researchers studying consciousness, memory, and the nature of identity in dementia patients. Dr. Amanda Foster from OHSU published a case study documenting Margaret's disappearance and recovery, noting that it represented the most significant temporary cognitive improvement ever documented in a patient with such severe Alzheimer's disease. The case raised profound questions about whether consciousness and memory might persist in damaged brains in ways that current medical understanding couldn't explain. Margaret's daughter Lisa struggled to process the revelations about her mother's possible hidden identity and background. The woman she had known as her mother had always been somewhat private about her childhood and early life, deflecting questions with vague references to family members who had died young and records that had been lost. Lisa had attributed this reticence to the normal privacy that many older Chinese Americans maintained about their experiences during periods of discrimination and hardship. The possibility that her mother had maintained a false identity for decades forced Lisa to reevaluate everything she thought she knew about her family history. It also raised practical questions about Margaret's medical care and legal status. If the documents establishing her identity were fraudulent, how would this affect her medical insurance, social security benefits, and other aspects of her care as her illness progressed? David Chen, Margaret's son, found the revelations about his mother's background easier to accept than his sister did. As a physician, he was fascinated by the medical implications of her temporary cognitive recovery and saw the hidden identity as a possible explanation for some of the mysteries that had always surrounded their mother's past. He had always wondered why Margaret seemed to have so few childhood memories and no contact with extended family members who might have shared her immigrant experience. The investigation into Margaret's disappearance officially concluded when Detective Rodriguez filed her final report 3 weeks after Margaret was found in San Francisco. The report documented the unprecedented nature of Margaret's temporary cognitive recovery and her apparent journey to reconnect with her hidden past, but it could not provide definitive explanations for how she had overcome her severe dementia or managed to leave the secure hospital facility without detection. The medical implications of Margaret's case continued to generate discussion and research long after she returned to Providence General's Memory Care Unit. Her story became a subject of study for researchers investigating the nature of consciousness in dementia patients and the possibility that severely damaged brains might retain more cognitive capacity than current diagnostic methods could detect. Margaret herself returned to her previous state of severe confusion and disorientation, showing no memory of her journey to San Francisco and no ability to access the Mandarin language skills she had demonstrated during her brief period of clarity. Her daily routine resumed its predictable pattern of confusion, fear, and gradual decline, as if the 3 days of unusual behavior had been a temporary window into a past that was now permanently closed to her conscious mind. Martinez continued to monitor Margaret's condition closely, hoping to detect any signs of further cognitive improvement or access to her hidden memory. However, the woman who had once navigated the complex process of traveling 63.5 miles to search for someone from her distant past, now struggled to remember where she was or recognize her own daughter's face when Lisa visited each Sunday. The security improvements at Providence General Hospital included additional monitoring systems and revised protocols for tracking patients with severe dementia, though the exact method Margaret had used to leave the facility remained unexplained. The case became a training example for hospital staff about the unpredictable nature of dementia and the importance of never underestimating the potential capabilities of patients whose cognitive abilities might fluctuate in ways that medical science couldn't predict. Margaret Chen's story raised profound questions about the nature of identity, memory, and consciousness that extended far beyond the medical mystery of her temporary recovery. If she had indeed lived under a false identity for 70 years, successfully concealing her true background until dementia stripped away the psychological barriers that had kept those memories hidden, what did that say about the fluid nature of identity and the stories people tell themselves and others about who they are? The case also highlighted the experiences of Chinese immigrants who had arrived in America during periods of discriminatory laws and social prejudice, when adopting false identities or concealing aspects of their backgrounds might have been necessary for survival and opportunity. Margaret's possible hidden identity represented not just a medical mystery, but a window into the historical experiences of immigrants who had been forced to reinvent themselves to find acceptance in American society. For the medical community, Margaret's case became a landmark study in the unexpected capabilities of damaged brains and the possibility that consciousness and memory might persist in ways that current diagnostic methods couldn't detect. Her story challenged assumptions about the finality of dementia and suggested that the human mind might retain more resilience and hidden capacity than anyone had previously imagined. The broader implications of Margaret's disappearance and temporary recovery continue to influence research into consciousness, memory, and identity in patients with severe cognitive impairment. Her case remains unique in medical literature, the only documented instance of a patient with such severe Alzheimer's disease experiencing such a dramatic and purposeful period of cognitive improvement that allowed her to reconnect with a hidden past that she had concealed for more than 70 years. Margaret Chen died peacefully in her sleep at Providence General Hospital on March 15, 2021. 18 months after her mysterious disappearance and recovery. She had shown no further signs of accessing her hidden memories or speaking Mandarin, remaining in a state of severe confusion and disorientation until her death. Her final weeks were marked by the same gentle decline that characterizes the end stage of Alzheimer's disease, with no indication that she retained any conscious memory of her remarkable journey to San Francisco or the buried identity that had briefly surfaced during her illness. Lisa and David Chen were left with more questions than answers about their mother's true identity and background, but they found comfort in knowing that during her final period of clarity, Margaret had been able to pursue something that mattered deeply to her, even if they couldn't fully understand what that was. The woman who had spent decades concealing her past had finally, if only briefly, been able to reconnect with the person she had been before she became Margaret Chen. The mystery of how Margaret managed to leave a secure hospital facility without detection was never fully solved, though investigators theorized that she might have observed nursing procedures during her weeks of hospitalization and waited for a brief opportunity when staff attention was diverted. The exact timeline of her departure remained unclear, but security improvements at the hospital ensured that such an incident would be much more difficult for future patients to replicate. Martinez published extensively about Margaret's case, contributing to medical literature about the unpredictable nature of consciousness in dementia patients and the possibility that severely damaged brains might retain more cognitive capacity than current diagnostic methods could detect. Her work influenced changes in how medical professionals assess and monitor patients with severe cognitive impairment, acknowledging that even the most advanced dementia might not completely eliminate the human capacity for purposeful behavior under certain circumstances. The case of Margaret Chen remains unique in medical literature, serving as both a mystery that challenges current understanding of consciousness and memory, and a reminder that the human mind retains secrets that even the most advanced medical science cannot fully explain. Her story continues to inspire research into the nature of identity, the resilience of the human spirit, and the possibility that even in the face of devastating illness, people might find ways to reconnect with the most essential parts of themselves, even if only for a brief and miraculous moment of clarity. But the story doesn't end with Margaret's death. In 2022, a remarkable discovery would shed new light on her mysterious journey and provide answers that no one had expected. The discovery came from an unlikely source, a renovation project at the old Chinatown apartment building, where Margaret had sought out Chen Wei during her period of temporary clarity. Workers demolishing a wall in the basement discovered a hidden compartment containing dozens of letters written in Chinese, photographs dating back to the 1940s, and official documents that had been carefully preserved for over 70 years. The documents belonged to Lin Ming, Margaret's true identity, and they told a story that was both heartbreaking and illuminating about why she had concealed her past for so long. The letters, translated by Dr. Wei Chen, a linguistics professor at UC Berkeley, who specialized in historical Chinese documents, revealed that Lin Ming had fled China in 1949 not as a student seeking education, but as a refugee escaping political persecution. Her family had been wealthy landowners who were targeted during the Communist Revolution, and Lin Ming had witnessed the execution of her parents and siblings before managing to escape to Hong Kong with the help of underground networks that smuggled refugees to safety. The documents showed that Lin Ming had assumed the identity of Margaret Chen, a Chinese-American woman who had died in a car accident in 1949 shortly before Lin Ming arrived in San Francisco. The real Margaret Chen had been born in Portland and had no living relatives, making her identity perfect for someone who needed to disappear completely into American society. Lin Ming had obtained Margaret's birth certificate, social security number, and educational records, then moved to Portland to establish herself as far from San Francisco's Chinese community as possible, where someone might have recognized her true identity. Most revealing were the personal letters that Lin Ming had written but never sent, documenting her struggle to maintain her false identity while grieving for the family and life she had lost in China. The letter, written in beautiful calligraphy that matched the handwriting on the paper Margaret had clutched during her journey to San Francisco, described her constant fear of being discovered and deported back to China, where she believed she would face execution for her family's perceived crimes against the communist government. The letters also revealed why Lin Ming had sought out Chen Wei specifically during her moment of clarity. Chen Wei had been mentioned in several letters as someone from her childhood village who had also emigrated to America. And Lin Ming had apparently maintained hope for decades that she might someday be able to reconnect with someone who knew her true identity. Her journey to San Francisco represented not just a return to her hidden past, but a desperate attempt to find validation that the person she had been before becoming Margaret Chen had actually existed. Foster, the neurologist who had studied Margaret's case extensively, found the discovery of these documents profoundly moving and scientifically significant. The letters provided concrete evidence that Margaret's temporary cognitive recovery had been triggered by deeply buried memories that had somehow remained accessible despite severe brain damage. The fact that she had sought out a specific person from her distant past suggested that her brief period of clarity had been driven by psychological needs that transcended the physical limitations of her damaged brain. The discovery also provided new insights into the immigrant experience of Chinese refugees who had arrived in America during the mid-20th century. Lin Ming's story represented thousands of similar cases where individuals had been forced to abandon their identities and assume false names to survive political persecution and discriminatory immigration laws. Her successful concealment of her true background for over 70 years demonstrated both the necessity of such deception and the psychological toll it extracted from those who lived with hidden identity. Lisa Chen, Margaret's daughter, found the discovery of her mother's letters both devastating and healing. Learning the truth about her mother's background explained many of the mysteries that had characterized Margaret's personality and behavior throughout Lisa's childhood. Margaret's reluctance to discuss her past, her occasional moments of sadness that seemed to have no apparent cause, and her exceptional mathematical abilities that seemed to come from nowhere all made sense when viewed through the lens of her hidden identity as Lin. The letters also contained references to Lisa and David that revealed how deeply Margaret had loved her children while simultaneously struggling with guilt about the false identity she had given them. Several letters described Margaret's fear that her children would discover the truth about her background and reject her for living a lie. She had apparently spent decades torn between her love for the family she had created as Margaret Chen and her grief for the family she had lost as Lin. Perhaps most remarkably, the letters contained detailed descriptions of the life Lin Ming had planned to live if she had been able to remain in China. Studying mathematics at university, becoming a professor, and eventually returning to help rebuild her village after the political turmoil had ended. The life that Margaret had actually lived in Portland, teaching mathematics at the university and raising two successful children, was remarkably similar to the dreams that Lin Ming had described in her hidden letter. The implications of this discovery extended beyond Margaret's individual story to broader questions about identity, memory, and the ways that traumatic experiences shape personality over decades. The fact that Margaret had unconsciously recreated aspects of Lin Ming's original life plan suggested that core aspects of identity might persist even when consciously suppressed, influencing major life decisions in ways that individuals themselves might not recognize. Dr. Martinez, who had cared for Margaret during her hospitalization, found the discovery of the letters both personally meaningful and professionally significant. The documents provided confirmation that Margaret's temporary cognitive recovery had been genuine and purposeful rather than a random neurological event. They also suggested that the human capacity for maintaining hope and connection might persist even in the face of devastating illness and the loss of conscious memory. The Chen Wei apartment building where the documents were discovered became the subject of additional historical research that revealed it had served as an unofficial community center for Chinese refugees during the night. Many residents had maintained hidden identities similar to Lin Ming's, and the building had served as a place where people could occasionally reconnect with others who shared their experiences of loss and concealment. The building's history helped explain why Margaret had instinctively traveled there during her period of clarity. It represented not just a connection to Chen Wei as an individual, but to a community of people who had shared her experience of living with hidden identities and suppressed memory. Her journey to San Francisco had been an attempt to return to the only place where she could be recognized for who she truly was, rather than who she had pretended to be. The medical significance of Margaret's case continues to influence research into consciousness and memory in dementia patients. The discovery of her letters provided crucial context that helped researchers understand that her temporary cognitive recovery had been driven by specific psychological needs rather than random neurological events. This understanding has led to new approaches in caring for dementia patients that focus on identifying and addressing emotional needs that might persist even when conscious memory has been severely compromised. The story of Margaret Chen and Lin Ming has become a powerful example of the hidden histories that many immigrant families carry, and the psychological costs of maintaining false identities over decades. Her experience represents thousands of similar stories of people who were forced to reinvent themselves to survive persecution and discrimination, often at great personal cost to their sense of identity and connection to their cultural heritage. Today, the letters and documents discovered in the Chinatown building are preserved at the Chinese Historical Society of America Museum in San Francisco, where they serve as part of an exhibit documenting the experiences of Chinese refugees who arrived in America during the mid-20s. The exhibit includes Margaret's story as an example of how the trauma of displacement and the necessity of assuming false identities affected individuals and families for generations. The final mystery of how Margaret managed to leave Providence General Hospital was partially solved when maintenance workers discovered that a service door leading to a rarely used stairwell had a faulty lock that could be opened from the inside without setting off alarm. Security footage showed that Margaret had somehow discovered this vulnerability during her weeks of hospitalization, possibly during the evening when she was observed studying the door access system. Her successful escape required not only temporary cognitive recovery but also careful observation and planning that demonstrated remarkable mental capacity for someone with such severe documented brain damage. The Margaret Chen case remains a landmark study in medical literature, cited in research papers about consciousness, memory, and identity in patients with severe cognitive impairment. Her story continues to challenge assumptions about the finality of dementia and the nature of human consciousness, serving as a reminder that even the most advanced medical science cannot fully explain the mysteries of the human mind and the persistence of the human spirit in the face of devastating illness.